Captain Marcus Thornfield had served the royal house of Valenhall for 23 years. His weathered hands gripped the stone balustrade of the castle's eastern tower as he watched the morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard below. The same courtyard where he had stood guard during Queen Isabella's funeral just 8 months ago. The memory still burned fresh in his mind. Queen Isabella had been beloved by everyone in the kingdom, from the smallest village child to the most hardened soldier. She had ruled with wisdom and kindness for 40 years, bringing peace and prosperity to Valenhall. When she passed away after a brief illness, the entire kingdom mourned as one. Marcus remembered how Queen Isabella would walk through the castle halls, always stopping to ask about his family, his health, his concerns. She knew every guard by name, every servant's birthday, every stable boy's favorite treat. She was not just a queen to them, she was family. Now her stepson, Prince Roderick, had become king, and he had married Lady Vivian just 2 months after taking the throne. The new Queen Vivian was nothing like Queen Isabella. Where Isabella was warm and approachable, Vivian was cold and distant. Where Isabella cherished tradition, Vivian seemed determined to erase every trace of the late queen's influence. Marcus had tried to give the new queen a chance. He understood that change was inevitable when new rulers took power. But what happened yesterday had crossed a line that he could never forgive. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the stone corridor behind him. Marcus turned to see his fellow guard, Lieutenant James Ashford, climbing the stairs with a grim expression on his face. "Any word from the king?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer from James's troubled look. James shook his head slowly. "The king left for the northern provinces yesterday morning for the trade negotiations. He won't be back for at least a week. Maybe 2. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Of course, Queen Vivian had waited until her husband was away to make her announcement. She was clever, he had to give her that. Clever and calculated. "The servants are all talking about it," James continued, lowering his voice. "Cook Mary was in tears this morning. Old Thomas from the stables looked like someone had died all over again." Marcus knew exactly how they felt. When Queen Vivian's chamberlain had announced yesterday that the annual memorial ceremony for Queen Isabella would be canceled this year, it felt like losing the beloved queen all over again. The memorial ceremony had been planned for months. Every year on the anniversary of Queen Isabella's passing, the entire kingdom would gather in the Great Hall for a ceremony of remembrance. People would share stories about how the late queen had touched their lives. Children would place flowers at her portrait. The royal guard would perform a ceremonial honor guard formation that had been specifically created in her memory. It was more than just a ceremony. It was a promise. A promise that Queen Isabella's memory would live on, that her kindness and wisdom would not be forgotten, that the love she had shown to her people would continue to inspire future generations. And now, Queen Vivian wanted to erase it all. Marcus walked over to the window that overlooked the castle gardens. Down below, he could see the gardeners tending to Queen Isabella's memorial rose garden. The late queen had loved roses, and in her honor, the most beautiful varieties from across the kingdom had been planted in a special section of the royal gardens. The roses bloomed magnificently every spring, creating a riot of color that could be seen from every window of the castle. But Marcus noticed something that made his blood boil. Several gardeners were digging up the rose bushes, loading them onto carts. He had heard rumors that Queen Vivian wanted to replace the memorial garden with a modern fountain featuring her own family crest. "She's destroying everything," Marcus muttered, his hands clenching into fists. James joined him at the window and saw what had captured Marcus's attention. "The rose garden, too?" "Every last bush, from what I can see," Marcus replied, his voice heavy with anger and sadness. The 2 men stood in silence for several minutes, watching as years of careful cultivation and loving maintenance were undone in a single morning. Each rose bush that was removed felt like another piece of Queen Isabella's legacy being erased. Marcus thought back to the conversation he had overheard 3 weeks ago. He had been standing guard outside the royal chambers when Queen Vivian's voice had carried through the heavy wooden doors. She had been talking to her personal advisor, Lady Cordelia, about modernizing the castle and moving beyond the past. "The people are far too attached to the dead queen," Vivian had said, her voice sharp with irritation. "They compare everything I do to her. Every decision I make is measured against what Isabella would have done. How can I establish my own authority when everyone is still worshipping a ghost?" Lady Cordelia had murmured some agreement, and then Vivian had continued. "The memorial ceremony is the worst part. Once a year, they all gather to talk about how wonderful she was, how much they miss her, how things were better when she was alive. It's like a public declaration that they wish I wasn't here." Marcus had felt sick listening to those words. Queen Vivian didn't understand that the people's love for Queen Isabella wasn't meant as an insult to her. It was simply the natural response to losing someone who had meant so much to so many. But apparently, Queen Vivian saw it as a threat to her own position. "Captain," James said quietly, interrupting Marcus's thoughts. "What are we going to do about this?" Marcus turned to look at his younger colleague. James had only been with the Guard for 5 years, but he had also felt the warmth of Queen Isabella's kindness. She had personally visited him in the infirmary when he had been injured during a training accident, bringing him books to read during his recovery and checking on his progress every day. "I don't know yet," Marcus admitted. "But I know we can't let this stand. Queen Isabella deserves better than this." As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of approaching horses echoed from the courtyard below. Marcus and James looked down to see a royal carriage pulling up to the castle's main entrance. Queen Vivian stepped out, dressed in an elaborate purple gown that seemed unnecessarily formal for a morning trip to the village. Following behind her was Lady Cordelia, a thin woman with sharp features who had arrived at court shortly after Vivian became queen. Marcus had never trusted Lady Cordelia. There was something calculating about the way she watched everything and everyone, as if she was constantly looking for weaknesses to exploit. "She's been to see the village council," James observed, noting the direction from which the carriage had arrived. Marcus nodded grimly. He had heard that Queen Vivian was meeting with local officials to discuss changes to traditional ceremonies and observances. No doubt she was trying to build support for her decision to cancel the memorial ceremony. But Marcus knew the people of Valenhall better than Queen Vivian did. They might be too polite to openly oppose their new queen, but that didn't mean they would simply forget about Queen Isabella. As he watched Queen Vivian disappear into the castle, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He turned to James with a determined expression. "Gather the senior guards for a meeting tonight after the evening watch change. Tell them to meet in the old armory, somewhere we can speak freely." James looked surprised. "What are you planning, Captain?" Marcus straightened his shoulders, the way he had been trained to do when preparing for battle. "If Queen Vivian won't honor Queen Isabella's memory, then we'll have to find another way to make sure it happens." The rest of the day passed slowly for Marcus. He went through his usual duties, inspecting the guard rotations, reviewing security protocols, conducting the afternoon training session for the newer recruits. But his mind was focused on the evening meeting. As the sun began to set, Marcus found himself walking through the castle's lower levels toward the old armory. The room hadn't been used for official purposes in years, not since the new weapons storage facility had been built. But it was private, away from the main corridors where conversations might be overheard. One by one, the senior guards arrived. Lieutenant James Ashford came first, followed by Sergeant William Cross, a grizzled veteran who had served under Queen Isabella since before Marcus had even joined the Guard. Then came Corporals David Sterling and Michael Rivers, both solid, dependable men who had proven their loyalty countless times over the years. Finally, Sergeant Helena Blackwood arrived. She was the only woman among the senior guards, but she had earned her position through skill, courage, and an unwavering sense of duty. Queen Isabella had personally recommended Helena for promotion, recognizing her exceptional abilities. Marcus waited until everyone was seated on the old wooden benches that lined the armory walls. The room was lit only by a few candles, creating dancing shadows that seemed to emphasize the serious nature of their gathering. "You all know why we're here," Marcus began, his voice low but carrying clearly in the stone-walled room. "Queen Vivian has canceled the memorial ceremony for Queen Isabella." There were murmurs of anger and frustration from around the room. Sergeant Cross spat into the dirt floor, a gesture that perfectly captured how they all felt about the situation. "It's not right, Captain," Helena said, her voice tight with emotion. "Queen Isabella meant everything to this kingdom. She saved us from wars, brought prosperity to every village, cared for the poorest families like they were her own children. How can we just pretend she never existed?" "We can't," Marcus replied firmly. "And we won't." He looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes in turn. "I know this is dangerous. I know we're talking about going against the direct orders of our current queen. But sometimes duty means more than just following orders. Sometimes duty means doing what's right, even when it's difficult." David Sterling leaned forward. "What exactly are you proposing, Captain?" Marcus had been thinking about this all day, weighing the options, considering the consequences. "If Queen Vivian won't allow an official memorial ceremony, then we'll organize an unofficial one. We'll gather the people who loved Queen Isabella, and we'll honor her memory the way she deserves to be honored." "Where?" asked Michael Rivers. "The Great Hall is out of the question. Queen Vivian has made it clear that no remembrance activities are allowed in the castle. Marcus had already considered this problem. The old chapel in the village. Father Benedict has been the royal chaplain for 30 years. He performed Queen Isabella's wedding ceremony and her funeral service. I'm sure he would be willing to host a memorial service." James looked worried. "But, Captain, if Queen Vivian finds out we organize this against her wishes, then we face the consequences," Marcus said simply. "But some things are worth the risk." Sergeant Cross, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. His voice was rough with age and emotion. "I've served this kingdom for 37 years. I've seen 3 different rulers, fought in 2 wars, and lived through famines and plagues and political upheavals. But Queen Isabella was the finest monarch I ever had the honor to serve." He paused, looking around at his fellow guards. "She once told me that the true measure of a person's life isn't how they're remembered by history books. It's how they're remembered by the people whose lives they touched. If we let Queen Vivian erase Queen Isabella's memory, then we're failing in our duty to honor the woman who gave so much to all of us." Helena nodded in agreement. Queen Isabella would never have canceled a ceremony honoring one of her predecessors, even if she disagreed with their policies. She understood the importance of respecting the past. "So we're all in agreement?" Marcus asked, though he could already see the answer in their faces. One by one, each guard voiced their commitment to the plan. They would organize a memorial ceremony worthy of Queen Isabella, regardless of the personal risk to themselves. As the meeting broke up and the guards began to leave, Marcus felt a mixture of determination and apprehension. They were about to embark on something that could cost them their positions, their homes, their futures in the kingdom. But as he walked back to his quarters through the castle corridors, Marcus passed Queen Isabella's portrait in the main hall. The painted eyes seemed to look directly at him, and for a moment he could almost hear her voice saying the words she had spoken to him so many times over the years. "Do what's right, Marcus, even when it's hard." He stopped in front of the portrait and gave a small, respectful bow. "We won't let them forget you, Your Majesty," he whispered. I promise you that. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. They would need to contact Father Benedict, spread word to the people who had loved Queen Isabella, and prepare for a ceremony that would honor her memory properly. They would also need to be extremely careful, because if Queen Vivienne discovered their plans too early, she would certainly find a way to stop them. But tonight, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since Queen Isabella's death. Hope. Hope that love and loyalty could triumph over political calculations. Hope that the memory of a good woman could survive the attempts to erase it. Hope that sometimes doing the right thing was enough to make a difference. As he reached his quarters, Marcus could see the first stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Queen Isabella had always loved the stars, often standing on the castle balconies in the evening to watch them emerge. She had once told Marcus that stars were like memories. They seemed small and distant, but their light could guide you through the darkest times. Tomorrow, Marcus and his fellow guards would begin their effort to keep Queen Isabella's star shining bright, no matter who tried to extinguish it. 3 days had passed since Marcus's secret meeting with the senior guards, and already their plan was beginning to take shape. Father Benedict had not only agreed to host the memorial ceremony at the village chapel, but had embraced the idea with an enthusiasm that surprised even Marcus. "Queen Isabella baptized my youngest grandson," the elderly priest had explained when Marcus visited him under cover of delivering routine security updates for the village. She held him in her arms and blessed him with such tenderness. When he grew sick with fever 2 winters ago, she personally brought medicine from the royal physicians and sat with my daughter through the night until the fever broke. Father Benedict's eyes had filled with tears as he spoke. "Your Majesty saved my family. The least I can do is ensure she is properly remembered." The chapel would provide the perfect setting. Built of warm stone and surrounded by ancient oak trees, it had been Queen Isabella's favorite place for private prayer. She had often walked there in the early mornings, before the castle staff had even begun their daily routines. But securing a location was only the beginning of their challenges. Marcus sat in his quarters, carefully writing messages by candlelight. Each letter had to be coded carefully. He couldn't risk Queen Vivienne's informants discovering their plans. The messages were disguised as routine correspondence about guard duties and village security, but hidden within the formal language were invitations to join the memorial gathering. A soft knock at his door interrupted his work. Marcus quickly covered the letters with official reports and called out, "Enter!" Lieutenant James Ashford stepped into the room, his face tense with concern. "Captain, we have a problem." Marcus gestured for James to sit down and speak quietly. "What's happened?" "Lady Cordelia has been asking questions," James whispered. "She summoned Corporal Rivers for questioning this afternoon. Wanted to know if he had noticed any unusual behavior among the guards, any private meetings or conversations about the Queen." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He had expected Queen Vivienne to be suspicious, but this was happening faster than he had anticipated. "What did Rivers tell her?" "He kept to our story. Told her that morale has been low since the memorial ceremony was cancelled, but that all the guards remain loyal to the crown. But, Captain, she's not stupid. She knows something is happening." Marcus stood up and walked to his window. Outside, the castle grounds were quiet, but he could see torches moving along the walls where the night guards were making their rounds. How many of those guards could he trust? How many might report their activities to Queen Vivienne? "We need to accelerate our timeline," Marcus decided. "If Lady Cordelia is already investigating, we can't afford to wait much longer." James looked worried. "But we haven't contacted everyone yet. The farmers from the outer villages, the crafters from the market district, the teachers from the royal school. There are still so many people who would want to honor Queen Isabella." Marcus turned back to his friend. "Then we'll have to trust that word will spread naturally." Queen Isabella touched so many lives that people will share the invitation with others who cared about her. Over the next 2 days, Marcus watched carefully as their network of supporters grew. Cook Mary quietly mentioned the gathering to trusted servants. Stablemaster Thomas shared the news with the blacksmiths and carpenters who worked around the castle. Helena spoke with the women who worked in the castle laundry, many of whom remembered how Queen Isabella had personally helped them when their families faced hardships. But they weren't the only ones taking notice. On the second evening after James's warning, Marcus was walking through the castle courtyard when he spotted something that made his blood run cold. Lady Cordelia was standing near the fountain, engaged in quiet conversation with Sir Edmund Fitzroy, one of the younger guards who had joined the Royal Guard only 6 months ago. Sir Edmund was ambitious, eager to advance his position at court. Marcus had never trusted him completely, sensing that the young man was more interested in personal gain than in service to the kingdom. Now watching Edmund nod enthusiastically as Lady Cordelia spoke to him, Marcus realized his instincts had been correct. After Lady Cordelia dismissed Sir Edmund and returned to the castle, Marcus intercepted the young guard near the stables. "Sir Edmund," Marcus called out in a friendly tone that masked his suspicion. "How goes your evening patrol?" Edmund turned, and Marcus caught a flicker of something, guilt, nervousness, in the young man's expression before he composed himself. "Very well, Captain. All quiet on the grounds." "I noticed you speaking with Lady Cordelia. Official business?" Edmund hesitated for just a moment too long. "She was asking about security preparations for the upcoming visit from the Duke of Westmarch. Nothing unusual." Marcus knew Edmund was lying. The Duke of Westmarch's visit had been cancelled weeks ago due to illness in his family. But Marcus simply nodded as if he believed the explanation. "Very good. Carry on with your duties." As Edmund walked away, Marcus made a mental note to be extremely careful about which guards they approached for help. Their circle of trust would have to remain smaller than he had originally hoped. The next morning brought both encouraging news and new concerns. Father Benedict sent word through Helena that at least 40 villagers had already committed to attending the memorial ceremony. The baker's wife would prepare special bread in Queen Isabella's honor. The flower seller would donate bouquets from her finest blooms. The schoolmaster planned to organize the village children to sing Queen Isabella's favorite hymns. But Sergeant Cross brought troubling information from his contacts among the castle staff. Queen Vivian had ordered the royal seamstresses to create new tapestries for the Great Hall, tapestries that would replace the ones depicting Queen Isabella's coronation and major accomplishments. "She's erasing every trace of Queen Isabella from the castle," Cross reported grimly. "Next week, they're planning to remove Queen Isabella's portrait from the main hall and replace it with one of Queen Vivian." Marcus felt anger surge through him. The portrait removal felt like a deliberate provocation, timed to coincide with what should have been the memorial ceremony week. "All the more reason to ensure our ceremony succeeds," Marcus declared. "If Queen Vivian wants to erase Queen Isabella from the castle, then we'll make sure her memory lives on in the hearts of the people." That afternoon, Marcus made a dangerous decision. He needed to visit the village personally to coordinate the final details with Father Benedict, but leaving the castle without official business would raise suspicions. He decided to use his authority as captain of the guard to conduct a security inspection of the village defenses. Accompanied by James and 2 other trusted guards, Marcus rode into the village just as the market was closing for the day. The streets were busy with people finishing their daily shopping and children playing in the square near the old well. As they approached the chapel, Marcus noticed how many villagers paused to watch them pass. Some offered respectful nods, others smiled warmly. These were people who remembered how Queen Isabella had treated the royal guards as valued members of the royal family rather than mere servants. Father Benedict was waiting in the chapel garden, tending to the rose bushes that had been planted there in Queen Isabella's honor. Unlike the ones being removed from the castle grounds, these roses were thriving under the priest's careful care. "Captain Thornfield," Father Benedict greeted him warmly. "How may I assist you today?" Speaking loudly enough for any observers to hear, Marcus replied, "Father, I need to inspect the chapel's security arrangements. We've received reports of increased bandit activity in the region." Father Benedict played his part perfectly, leading them into the chapel while discussing fictional security concerns. Once inside, with the heavy wooden doors closed behind them, their conversation became much more focused. "How many people can we expect?" Marcus asked in a low voice. "At least 60, possibly more," Father Benedict replied. "Word has spread beyond what we initially planned. People are coming from villages as far as Millbrook and Ravens Hollow, places where Queen Isabella established schools and medical clinics." Marcus was amazed. Queen Isabella's influence had reached further than even he had realized. "What about logistics?" James asked. 60 people is more than the chapel can comfortably hold." Father Benedict smiled. "I've thought of that. We'll hold the ceremony in the chapel garden. The weather should be pleasant, and there's a natural amphitheater created by the hillside behind the chapel. Everyone will be able to see and hear clearly." They spent another hour discussing details. Helena would coordinate with the village women to ensure enough food and drink for everyone. Sergeant Cross would organize an honor guard formation, not in their official uniforms, but in simple dark clothing that would still allow them to pay proper military respects. Father Benedict would lead the ceremony itself, inviting people to share their memories and stories. As they prepared to leave, Father Benedict pulled Marcus aside. "Captain, I want you to know how much this means to all of us. Queen Isabella would be proud of what you're doing." Marcus shook the priest's hand firmly. "She deserves no less, Father." The ride back to the castle should have been peaceful, but as they approached the main gates, Marcus noticed additional guards on duty. More concerning, Sir Edmund was among them, and his attention seemed focused entirely on Marcus's returning party. "Standard inspection completed," Marcus reported to the gate captain, a man he had known for years. "All village defenses are adequate." But as they rode into the courtyard, Marcus caught sight of a figure watching from an upper window of the castle. Lady Cordelia stood silhouetted against the light, and even from a distance Marcus could sense her calculating gaze. That evening, the full impact of their exposure became clear. Marcus was reviewing duty rosters in his office when Sergeant Cross burst through the door without knocking, something the veteran guard would never do unless the situation was urgent. "Captain, they've arrested David Sterling." Marcus felt the world tilt beneath him. "What? On what charges?" "Conspiracy against the crown, inciting sedition. They took him from his quarters an hour ago." Marcus's mind raced. David had been one of the guards at their original planning meeting, but he had been careful, discreet. How had they connected him to their activities? "Sir Edmund," James said grimly, having followed Cross into the office, "it has to be. David must have said something that Edmund overheard and reported." Marcus slammed his fist against his desk. They had been so careful, but not careful enough. "What's David's status?" Marcus asked. "They have him in the castle dungeons," Cross replied. "No visitors allowed, not even family." This changed everything. If Queen Vivian was willing to arrest guards on suspicion of disloyalty, none of them were safe. The memorial ceremony was now not just an act of remembrance, it had become an act of rebellion. "Do we call it off?" James asked quietly. Marcus looked at his two most trusted colleagues. Cross, with his weathered face and steady hands that had never failed in battle. James, young but brave, with the integrity that Queen Isabella had always valued. These men had risked their careers, their freedom, possibly their lives to honor the memory of a woman who had meant everything to them. "No," Marcus said firmly. "We don't call it off. If anything, David's arrest proves how important this is. Queen Vivian is trying to rule through fear and intimidation. Queen Isabella ruled through love and respect. If we abandon our ceremony now, we're letting fear win. Cross nodded slowly. Queen Isabella faced down armies to protect this kingdom. I think we can face down one angry queen to protect her memory. James still looked worried. But Captain, if they arrested David just on suspicion, what will they do if they catch us at the actual ceremony? Marcus had been thinking about this all evening. Then we make sure they don't catch us. We change the location, we change the timing, we change everything they might be expecting. He walked to his window and looked out at the village lights twinkling in the distance. Somewhere out there, dozens of people were preparing to honor Queen Isabella despite the risks. They deserved leaders who were willing to take the same risks. Send word to Father Benedict, Marcus decided. We're moving the ceremony to tomorrow night instead of this weekend, and we're not holding it in the chapel garden. Too exposed. Tell him to meet me at the old oak grove near Millbrook Falls. It's far enough from the village that Queen Vivian's spies won't think to look there. Cross raised an eyebrow. That's a 2-hour ride from here. How do we get away from the castle without raising suspicions? Marcus smiled grimly. We're going to volunteer for extra night patrol duty. What better way to demonstrate our loyalty to Queen Vivian than by working additional shifts to ensure the kingdom's security? As his fellow guards left to begin spreading the new plans, Marcus remained at his window, staring out at the stars. Queen Isabella had always said that the darkest nights made the stars shine brightest. Tomorrow night they would find out just how bright their particular stars could shine. The ancient oak grove near Millbrook Falls had stood for over 300 years. Its massive trees forming a natural cathedral that seemed perfect for their purpose. As Marcus rode through the moonlit forest paths, he could hear the distant sound of water cascading over stones, a peaceful backdrop that Queen Isabella would have loved. It was well past midnight when Marcus, James, Helena, and Sergeant Cross arrived at the grove. They had volunteered for the late-night patrol as planned, then slipped away from their routes one by one. The risk was enormous. If their absence was discovered, they would face immediate arrest. But as they entered the clearing beneath the ancient oaks, Marcus knew they had made the right choice. Nearly 80 people had gathered in the grove, far more than they had expected. Farmers held lanterns that cast dancing shadows on the tree bark. Village families sat on blankets spread across the forest floor. Elderly craftsmen who had worked on the castle during Queen Isabella's reign stood quietly among teachers, shopkeepers, and laborers. Father Benedict stood near the largest oak tree, his white robes making him visible in the dim light. When he saw Marcus approaching, he smiled with genuine warmth. "Captain, I've never seen anything like this," the priest whispered. "People have been arriving for the past hour. Some walked 10 miles through the night just to be here." Marcus looked around the gathering and felt his throat tighten with emotion. A young mother held a sleeping child, the same woman Queen Isabella had helped when her husband died in a farming accident. An elderly blacksmith sat with his grandson, both wearing their finest clothes, despite the informal forest setting. 3 women from the castle kitchen staff had somehow managed to slip away from their duties. Near the edge of the gathering, Marcus spotted a surprise that made his heart pound with both joy and concern. Cook Mary was there, along with stablemaster Thomas and 2 other castle servants. They had risked their positions and their safety to attend. "How did they all know about the location change?" Marcus asked Helena quietly. "Word travels fast when people care deeply about something," she replied. "And everyone here cared deeply about Queen Isabella." Father Benedict cleared his throat softly, and the murmur of quiet conversations faded into silence. The only sounds were the distant waterfall and the gentle rustle of leaves overhead. "My friends," Father Benedict began, his voice carrying clearly in the still night air, We gather tonight not in defiance of authority, but in celebration of love. We are here because Queen Isabella's memory deserves to live on, regardless of who wishes it forgotten. A woman near the front of the gathering stood up. Marcus recognized her as Sarah Fletcher, whose daughter had received a royal scholarship to study at the capital's university, a scholarship personally arranged by Queen Isabella. "Your Majesty changed my family's entire future," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her obvious emotion. "When my daughter showed aptitude for learning, the Queen didn't just offer money for education. She came to our cottage, sat at our table, and talked with my daughter about her dreams. She made my child believe that a farmer's daughter could become anything she wanted to be." An elderly man named Robert Mills rose to speak next. "When the Great Flood destroyed our village 5 years ago, Queen Isabella didn't just send supplies. She came herself, rolled up her sleeves, and helped us rebuild. I watched her carry timber and mix mortar alongside the rest of us. She got her royal dress dirty and didn't care one bit." One by one, people began sharing their stories. The schoolmaster talked about how Queen Isabella had visited his classroom every year, always remembering each child's name and asking about their progress. A young father described how the Queen had personally delivered medicine when his son fell ill with a rare disease. An elderly grandmother spoke through tears about how Queen Isabella had attended her husband's funeral, even though he was just a simple village tailor. Marcus found himself remembering his own experiences with the beloved Queen. The time she had visited him in the infirmary after he was injured defending the castle from bandits. The way she had personally written to his mother when his father died. The countless mornings when she had stopped to ask about his well-being, his hopes, his concerns. When the storytelling portion of the ceremony concluded, Sergeant Cross stepped forward. Despite wearing plain clothes instead of his Royal Guard uniform, his military bearing was unmistakable. "Brothers and sisters," Cross said in his gruff but respectful voice, "Queen Isabella honored us all with her service. Tonight, we honor her with our remembrance. But more than that, we promise to carry forward the love and kindness she showed us. We promise to treat others the way she treated us, with dignity, respect, and genuine care." The gathering murmured agreement, and Marcus felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced since Queen Isabella's death. This was exactly what the memorial ceremony should have been, a genuine celebration of a remarkable woman's life and legacy. But their peaceful moment was about to be shattered. The sound of approaching horses echoed through the forest, growing louder by the second. Marcus immediately gestured for silence, but it was too late. Torchlight flickered between the trees as at least 20 mounted figures surrounded the grove. Queen Vivienne rode into the clearing on a magnificent black horse, flanked by Lady Cordelia and Sir Edmund. Behind them came more guards, their weapons drawn and ready. The people in the gathering scrambled to their feet, fear evident on every face. Children pressed close to their parents. The elderly leaned heavily on walking sticks as they struggled to stand. Queen Vivienne's voice cut through the night like a blade. "What is the meaning of this illegal assembly?" Marcus stepped forward, placing himself between the Queen and the gathered villagers. "Your Majesty, you were simply organizing a treasonous gathering in direct violation of my explicit orders," Queen Vivienne interrupted coldly. She looked magnificent and terrible in her royal riding attire, her crown glinting in the torchlight. Lady Cordelia guided her horse closer to the crowd. "Captain Thornfield, you are under arrest for conspiracy against the crown, inciting rebellion, and organizing unauthorized assemblies." But before Marcus could respond, something unexpected happened. Father Benedict stepped forward, his elderly frame straight with dignity. "Your Majesty, if anyone is to be arrested, it should be me. I organized this gathering." "No," said Sarah Fletcher firmly, moving to stand beside the priest. "The gathering was my idea. Arrest me." Robert Mills joined them. "You'll have to arrest me too, Your Majesty. I planned this ceremony." One by one, every person in the grove stepped forward, forming a protective circle around Marcus and the other guards. Young and old, rich and poor, they stood together with remarkable courage. Cook Mary, despite her position as a castle servant, spoke clearly. "Your Majesty, we all planned this ceremony. Captain Thornfield was simply helping us honor a woman who meant everything to this kingdom." Queen Vivian's horse pranced nervously as she surveyed the united crowd before her. For the first time since arriving, she seemed uncertain. "You forget yourselves," she said, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. "I am your queen. You owe me loyalty and obedience." An unexpected voice answered her. Thomas, the stablemaster, who had served the royal family for over 30 years. "Your Majesty," Thomas said respectfully but firmly, "we do owe you loyalty, but we also owe Queen Isabella our gratitude. She earned our love through 40 years of service, kindness, and sacrifice. Honoring her memory doesn't diminish our respect for you." Marcus watched Queen Vivian's face carefully. In the flickering torchlight, he could see emotions warring in her expression: anger, frustration, but also something that might have been uncertainty or even fear. Lady Cordelia leaned over to whisper something in the Queen's ear, but Queen Vivian held up a hand to silence her advisor. For a long moment, the only sounds in the grove were the distant waterfall and the snorting of horses. The entire kingdom seemed to hold its breath, waiting for their queen's decision. Finally, Queen Vivian spoke, her voice quieter than before. "Tell me about her." The request surprised everyone, including Lady Cordelia, who looked shocked at this change in tone. "Tell me about Queen Isabella," Queen Vivian repeated. "I want to understand why you would risk so much to honor her memory." Marcus exchanged glances with Father Benedict, then took a careful step forward. "Your Majesty," Marcus began, "Queen Isabella believed that true leadership meant serving others rather than being served. She taught us that strength comes from lifting others up, not from putting them down." Sarah Fletcher found her voice again. "She remembered everyone's name, Your Majesty. My daughter, my neighbors, even the dogs that roamed the village. She knew them all and cared about each one." Robert Mills nodded. "When disasters struck, Queen Isabella didn't send help. She became help. She worked alongside us, suffered with us, celebrated with us." As more villagers began sharing their memories, Marcus watched Queen Vivian's expression change. The hard lines around her eyes softened slightly. Her rigid posture relaxed almost imperceptibly. Cook Mary stepped forward boldly. "Your Majesty, Queen Isabella would have wanted you to succeed. She always said that the kingdom was bigger than any one person, even bigger than the crown itself. She would have supported you and helped you, if she could have." These words seemed to strike Queen Vivian deeply. She sat quietly on her horse for several minutes, apparently lost in thought. Lady Cordelia tried again to whisper advice, but Queen Vivian ignored her completely. Finally, the Queen dismounted her horse and walked slowly toward the large oak tree where Father Benedict had been conducting the ceremony. The crowd parted respectfully to let her pass. "I never knew her personally," Queen Vivian said, her voice barely above a whisper. "King Roderick told me about her accomplishments, her policies, her successes. But he never told me about this, about how much she meant to individual people." She turned to face the gathered crowd. "I canceled the memorial ceremony because I felt threatened by her memory. I thought people's love for her meant they could never accept me." Marcus sensed this was a crucial moment. "Your Majesty, love isn't like a finite resource that gets used up. People's capacity to care about Queen Isabella doesn't reduce their ability to respect you. In fact, her example could guide you toward the same kind of meaningful leadership. Queen Vivienne looked around the grove at the faces surrounding her, people who had risked everything to honor their beloved former queen's memory. "I see that now," she said softly. "I see that I was wrong." Lady Cordelia's voice cut sharply through the quiet moment. "Your Majesty, you mustn't let these people manipulate you. They're rebels who defied your direct orders. They must be punished." But Queen Vivienne turned to face her advisor with new resolve. "Lady Cordelia, you're dismissed from my service. Return to the castle and pack your belongings. You'll be departing tomorrow morning." Lady Cordelia's face went white with shock and anger. "Your Majesty, you're making a terrible mistake. These people will never respect you now that you've shown weakness." "I haven't shown weakness," Queen Vivienne replied firmly. "I've shown wisdom. There's a difference." As Lady Cordelia and Sir Edmund were escorted away by the other guards, Queen Vivienne turned back to the gathering. "Father Benedict," she said formally, "I would like to make an official request. Will you conduct a memorial ceremony for Queen Isabella next week in the Great Hall of the castle? I want the entire kingdom to be invited." Father Benedict bowed deeply. "It would be my greatest honor, Your Majesty." Queen Vivienne then looked directly at Marcus. "Captain Thornfield, I apologize for arresting Corporal Sterling unjustly. He'll be released immediately with full honors restored. I also want to ask you to help me understand how Queen Isabella earned such devotion. I have much to learn about true leadership." Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he had been carrying for months. "Your Majesty, I would be honored to share what I learned serving Queen Isabella." As the crowd began to disperse, people approached Queen Vivienne one by one to speak with her personally. Marcus watched as she listened carefully to each person, asking questions about their lives, their families, their connection to Queen Isabella. The young queen had a lot to learn, but Marcus could see she was genuinely trying to understand. That willingness to learn, to admit mistakes, to change course when necessary, those were the qualities that had made Queen Isabella so special. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood in the great hall of the castle as Father Benedict conducted the official memorial ceremony for Queen Isabella. Queen Vivienne sat in the front row, listening intently as person after person shared stories about the beloved late queen. The hall was packed to capacity, with people standing along the walls and crowding in the doorways. The ceremony lasted for over 3 hours, but no one seemed impatient or bored. When the formal ceremony concluded, Queen Vivienne stood to address the gathering. "Today, I learned that Queen Isabella's greatest achievement wasn't any single policy or accomplishment," she said, her voice carrying clearly throughout the hall. "Her greatest achievement was showing all of us what it means to lead with love instead of fear, to serve others instead of being served, to build people up instead of tearing them down." She paused, looking around at the faces in the crowd. "I promise you that I will strive to follow her example. I won't always succeed, but I will always try. And I hope that someday, when my own time as queen is over, people will remember me with even a fraction of the love and respect you show for Queen Isabella." The applause was thunderous and heartfelt. After the ceremony, as the hall slowly emptied, Marcus found himself standing once again before Queen Isabella's portrait, which Queen Vivienne had ordered returned to its place of honor. Queen Vivienne approached and stood beside him, both of them gazing up at the painted image of the beloved late queen. "Do you think she would be proud of how this all turned out?" Queen Vivienne asked quietly. Marcus smiled, remembering Queen Isabella's gentle wisdom, her patient guidance, her unwavering belief in the goodness of people. "Your Majesty," he replied, "I think Queen Isabella would be very proud indeed, not just of the ceremony, but of your courage in changing course when you realized you were wrong. She always said that true strength comes from the willingness to grow and learn. Queen Vivian nodded thoughtfully. Captain Thornfield, I want you to know that David Sterling will be promoted to lieutenant for his loyalty and integrity. And I'd like to establish an annual scholarship program in Queen Isabella's name, something that will help young people achieve their dreams the way she helped so many during her lifetime. Marcus felt his eyes moisten with gratitude. She would love that, Your Majesty. She always believed in investing in the future. As they stood together in the quiet hall, Marcus reflected on everything that had happened. The anger and frustration that had driven him to organize the secret ceremony seemed like distant memories now. What remained was something far more valuable, a renewed sense of hope for the kingdom's future. Queen Vivian was young and had made mistakes, but she had also shown the wisdom to learn from those mistakes. With guidance and patience, she might indeed become a worthy successor to Queen Isabella's legacy. Outside the castle windows, the stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Marcus thought about Queen Isabella's words about stars and memories, about how the smallest lights could guide you through the darkest times. Tonight, the kingdom felt brighter than it had in months. Queen Isabella's memory would live on, not just in secret gatherings or hidden ceremonies, but in the open hearts and minds of a people committed to carrying forward her legacy of love, service, and compassion. And that, Marcus knew, was exactly what Queen Isabella would have wanted.